Hello and welcome to PEP, which is Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance, where I talk to my guests about how they got a PEP in their step, in other words, what's empowered them, and how they have put a PEP in other people's step, in other words, how they have empowered others in their work. I'm your host, Graham Salinger, founder and president of Salinger Coaching Solutions. We empower people and empower success. And the topic of today's video is going to be worker burnout, employee burnout, and its impact on institutions and organizations broadly. And to have that conversation, I am joined by Julian Cohen-Serrins, who is a licensed clinical social worker. He received his MSW at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice, and is currently a PhD student at NYU's Silver School of Social Work. Julian's focus and expertise relates to our topic today, which again is burnout. Specifically, he explores divergent views about what causes burnout, as well as effectiveness and accuracy of interventions and strategies used to mitigate burnout. Julian's career has spanned across various mental health organizations in both clinical and leadership roles, from large state-run inpatient psychiatric centers to local wellness clinics, homeless shelters, and partial hospital programs. He was integral in the startup of Philadelphia's only Medicaid-funded acute partial hospital program for co-occurring substance use and mental health issues. Julian hopes to bridge his clinical intricacies of occupational stress with organizational thinking to structurally improve the workplace. More simply put, Julian hopes to finally address burnout and the challenging and the changing nature of work. All right. So Julian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this topic. I think if there is one topic that is really important to work, employees, and institutions right now, I think this is one of the most important topics to think about. And so I want to start the conversation by asking you sort of just your background in terms of how you got into this kind of work. So, and I ask that because in my coaching practice, I focus on helping people and leaders think about their passion, their purpose, and their perseverance. Those are sort of the three pillars of my pedagogy. So I just want to know what sparked your passion for social work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important point because I think a lot of social work, it hinges on passion in a lot of ways. So as a field, social work is very systemic. So it looks at the interactions between individuals, circumstances, behaviors, and resources, but it does that in a very kind of very systemic way. So what I mean by that is that it doesn't just look at individual symptoms or individual pathology. It goes beyond that, and it goes into looking at social systems, it goes into political systems, local resources. It's called ecological systems theory, and it actually kind of branches out, kind of like a dartboard. Like in the center you have your bullseye, and that's the individual, and it kind of branches out from there. So it's a very systemic. It can be a very heady field. It can be a very kind of complex field, but it only really becomes a practice, and it only leads to someone thriving when they really have that passion, they really have that drive to see people thrive more than just I think your basic kind of feeling better, but it's about elevating people, and that takes more than just individual approaches. It takes working with communities, working with family systems, and goes as far up as even global politics sometimes.
Yeah, and so what made you interested in that? I hear your passion. What sort of sparked that passion for you?
Right. Yeah. So for me, early on in my undergraduate career, I was looking at I was a psychology major. I was looking at all the kind of ways that you can kind of work on individual behaviors and how people can improve and thrive. And I really wanted to take a political stance in that. I didn't believe that it's just objective and it's just kind of this like you're kind of on the couch and that it's like a blank slate. People aren't blank slates. Mm-hmm. So I've always been very interested in politics, always been very interested in economics, and a lot of progressive theory in that, community organizing. So I kind of wanted to find a field that bridged those things. Mm-hmm. And I kept getting pointed towards social work. It didn't happen the first time. It took a little bit of time for me to learn that social work was out there, and that it wasn't just kind of like a stereotype where you have someone in a hospital giving out parking tokens. That it was a field that has a theory. So for me, I'm looking to bridge systemic thinking, and I'm looking to bridge individual behavior and psychology. And I wanted to do that in a way that was really like focused on helping people, not necessarily stuck in the clouds. or sometimes overly bogged down with just kind of philosophy. Philosophy is important. I really take that very seriously, but I didn't want just that either. So I graduated from college, and I'm at the Bronx Psychiatric Children's Center doing work. And I'm kind of experiencing what that mental health system was like at a state-run level. I know you already read that, so the audience already knows that. But for me, it was an experience in what people were going through, both people who were being treated there and the workers there. And that was really important to me, to see the effects such a difficult work environment had on employees. I don't necessarily mean the work of interacting with clients, because that's something we're all passionate about doing. If you're in the field, that's what you want to be doing. You want to be helping people who are going through a tough time. You want to be looking at what systems in their life need to be worked on or can be helped with certain resources, but it's never just that simple. So that was very eye-opening to me, to see kind of the role of organizational systems, of hierarchies, the role of race in the workplace, gender in the workplace, and how that can create a lot of inequity, and it can really lead to very different experiences for different employees. So a really important experience for me. It actually came maybe my first or second day at Bronx Psychiatric, where I was walking with a friend, and my friend was an African-American woman at the time, and I haven't talked to her in a little bit, so if she sees this, hi, hope you're doing well. But we were walking into the center together, and I was, barely an employee. I knew nothing. She was a veteran. She knew everything. She knew the whole system. She knew everybody there. I was learning from her. I would like follow her around, just kind of be like, oh, I'd be like 2 feet behind her. That's what you do. And we walk in, and there's a new security guard there, and he looks at me and he goes, oh, so you're the new doctor. Doesn't acknowledge her at all. I mean, it was completely based on perceptions, on race, on gender. I mean, it was complete injustice. And, we both kind of like, were exasperated. We just kind of like, what? And just kind of laughed and kept walking, because we had our IDs, so we just walk in. But it was a really eye-opening experience to me as I reflected on that. And I started to pay attention more to organizations and to the workplace and what that meant. So that kind of got me started. I looked into, joining fields and how I can get these systems involved with psychology and behavior, led to social work. I applied to University of Pennsylvania, and I was sure I wasn't getting in. I thought this is just like a shot in the dark. I just wanted to get something that would really lead to the ability to practice and lead to the ability to make substantive change in the workplace, but also for individuals. I'm passionate about psychotherapy too. And I got really lucky. I got the call that I was in, and moved to Philadelphia, and had this amazing experience at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was able to bring in a lot of other disciplines too. So things like management, conflict resolution, international relations, and the various fields within international relations. I know it's a huge field, but I was able at Penn to kind of bridge those gaps into social work and kind of see those intersections. That was really important for me too. It really it filled out that system thinking in a really in-depth way. So I had a great experience there, graduate from there. And usually when people graduate, they want to go for that license if they're clinically focused. So I was, and I still had that passion for therapy. And that's where I kind of got into more of the management side of things, getting into, we funding a partial hospital program, creating it, the structures, the nitty gritty details. And I found that I actually had maybe more fun doing that, designing trainings and what kinds of employees and systems in play, and setting culture and policy. That to me, it was so exciting. I felt like I could do this maybe forever. And it integrated my clinical knowledge, because you have to understand where people are. You have to understand who you're talking to and what they're about. So that's, I guess I probably explained more than I should have, but that's kind of a snapshot.
No, it touches on a lot of the things I want to talk about, but to bring it to the main point is that you're able to have lots of passions and bring that into, it is interdisciplinary and very broad, but you're able to find your niche and bring it to something that bring those big passions into like a really focused passion. So that's awesome. You use the word thrive a lot in describing both institutions and ecosystems and individual clients. And so, as I said in my opening, one of the things that I work on is helping people and organizations persevere. And I call it, the process that I call it is strive to thrive, because I'm a nerd and I like weird word marketing things.
I love it.
Yeah. So I call it helping people strive to thrive. So I want to talk to you about what that means to you in terms of perseverance, and you've worked in various contexts, as you just spoke about, thinking organizationally and in direct mental health services. So what are some examples of people and or institutions that you've seen successfully persevere in the work that you've done?
I think it's a really important question. And I think that it's important to give illustrations of both because they can be different, but they're both worth highlighting and noticing. So I think when we talk about individual thriving in the workplace, we're talking about that engagement with the work that you do, feeling fulfilled by the work that you do, but it also it plays into how you are in that environment. So sometimes we think of the workplace as separated from who we are or where we are. The fact is, we spend a ton of time at work. We develop at work. You could make the argument we psychologically develop at work. So in that environment, you're responding to the environment itself. It's having an effect on your development and your perceptions of the world. And what that really leads to, though, is safety, comfort, control of the environment, control of what you can do and how you can do your job. And when I say thrive, what I really mean by that is not just baseline function. That, I mean, if someone goes to work and every day they're just making it through 9 to 5, maybe they might not slip into burnout, but they likely will. And it's going to be, a negative work experience. The quality of their work is going to go down. That's been shown in studies to lead to all sorts of issues psychologically and even materially, like turnover and losing income. That can happen too. But the thriving means is that true engagement with your work. It means that you really you are feeling fulfilled by what you're doing. You're actually doing something that you care about, and it's a skill that you care about and that you can develop within yourself. I think, but on the other end, organizational thriving, I think, this might seem really intuitive and basic, but part of it is just when employees are working together and they're becoming a community. They're going beyond just like a conglomeration of individuals doing their own mission, and they're actually, I mean, to use the word synergizing. Sorry if that's kind of a cliche term, but the idea of, thank you, being more than just the sum of your parts. And when an organization is able to do that, it means that they've created that safety for all their workers. They've created, job crafting. So the idea of the job fits what you're passionate about. And then the organization starts to thrive. It starts to be able to go beyond just, serving a customer what they say they're going to serve, but it's improving upon what they're doing. It is innovating in their own field. It's innovating within making an organization more appealing, because that's a continuous process too. I think we often think of thriving as there's like a start and an end. I would argue there really isn't. I think that it can keep going, and ideally it does keep building individually and as an organization. So, I mean, you can point to really kind of like some, I don't know, random company, Amazon. You can point to Amazon. Amazon went from books to selling every product on earth, right? So it innovated. And there's more examples of, for example, you can look at healthcare organizations going from doing basic checkups and tertiary care to getting into prevention programs, going into schools of community education, engaging with their community, not being a stranger to the community or being like a sore spot, but actually inviting the community in. That's an example of organizational thriving too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so can you talk about what managers or CEOs or anybody in a leadership role can do to foster that level of perseverance and thriving?
Yeah, that's quite a challenge. I think that being in a management role or in a frontline worker role, it seems like sometimes you're speaking different languages, and that your priorities might not always be the same, even though they ultimately are. But sometimes that's easier to miss than to catch.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first thing that I would say that kind of leads to that thriving is taking a second to listen. Evaluate. Be that kind of that sponge or that fly on the wall. I mean, for me, sometimes it's be that, turn on that therapist mode and really look at the environment that you're in, observe it. Don't just hear the words people are saying. So if you're a manager or CEO, not just what your employees say to you about the job, but how are they going about doing the job? How are they interacting with peers? What are some of the rumors? What are, you can even get into body language if you really want to be very advanced about it. If all your employees are saying they're doing fine and they're looking miserable, that might be a sign of somewhere to start. Maybe some things aren't being said. Communication channels aren't open. A lack of safety. I'm probably going to keep going back to that, but a lack of safety in the workplace. So the step one would be just take that time to listen and evaluate your organization. Do a status check. It's really important in individual therapy. It's really important in management too.
For sure. Yeah, and I would say that's where folks like me that do the coaching or the consulting and both helping an individual, whether it's employee, figure their stuff out, or helping a leader who's having trouble creating that alignment. That's where folks like I come in to help them with those organizations. They might be personal challenges or individual challenges, but that stuff can easily create a cyclical challenge within an organization. So that's where that hard work comes in. Sorry.
We need coaches. That's another part that I think is actually really important. That like I think we often think that like the CEO is like the king at the top of the mountain. It's not a great model, probably. I mean, there's literature. I shouldn't say probably. There's a lot of research that shows that it's not great to be the dictator. It's great. It's even better to invite in experts from outside or within your agency, however you're kind of doing it, but to want to ask for help. So let's say you do your evaluation. You know what some problems are, and you're not able to address them. You think, man, I don't even know where to start. To think that you're not going to ask for help is a mistake. That is when you go to a coach, you go to a trusted mentor, or you look in your organization for kind of people with high social capital, people who are leaders, maybe not officially. That happens all the time in organizations. I've worked in some hospital settings, and sometimes it's the people at the front desk who hold all the keys. And if you want to know what's going on in an organization, you walk to the front desk, you get to know them. You see, they see the organization in a totally different way that you do. Than you do, and it can be invaluable. But if you don't have that, or you're uncomfortable with that, I'd go to a coach.
Yeah, I think the benefit, and some of the coaching is helping, the clients build in those internal mechanisms that you're talking about. But people invest money in technology, they invest money in new projects, they invest money in a lot of stuff. But if the boss doesn't have alignment with the folks that he or she is working with, coming to a coach sends the message that you're also willing to invest in the weaknesses that maybe you have, or the pain points that aren't working. So it also creates a sort of mindset, and it's sort of, you're signaling to your employees, this is a problem, and we can't just out compete our way to the top. Maybe I need to humble myself and bring somebody in. So it's also sort of a psychological investment as well.
Yeah, that's what comes to mind. That's a pretty clinical tactic too, because acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and acknowledging that you're imperfect, actually it's an equalizing move. It says, look, we're in this together. I have things I got to work on. There are things you have to work on. I'm all in. I'm not going to just sit there and be on my high horse. We're just going to work through this together. And if you can break down those kind of hierarchies, I think your organization's already starting to be in pretty good shape.
For sure, yeah. I did want to get to some definitions of terms. And so I know that most people have an understanding, or probably think they have an understanding of stress. We're talking about burnout. So can you distinguish for me the difference between sort of what typical stress at the workplace might look like versus when it is burnout, and what employers really need to do to help mitigate both the risks and consequences of burnout, both for the mental health of their employees, but also for the institutional health and well-being of an organization?
So important. Yeah, it's a very easy thing to misunderstand, I think. So when we look at stressors can be any part of the job that can be difficult, that can bring you under that kind of that crunch, or that feeling like you maybe don't know what to do, or you're not sure you're going to be able to pull it off. Those things are all stressors. We have stressors in our everyday life. We have stressors at work. Stressors are really hard to avoid because they're not always in your control. They can be. Sometimes it can be due to individual habits that kind of make it harder to do your job. But I tend to push back on that and say that very often we're responding to environments, cultures, physical spaces. These all affect and can create stressors. So, for example, in Bronx Psych, it's a good kind of place to go back to. There were some rooms that were really not well kept up, and in those rooms, a lot more stuff happened. People were more stressed. It was harder to get through to the clients you were talking to. It was harder to communicate with your coworkers because it was kind of looking like it was crumbling. And then they renovated it. they repainted. They made it look nice, and it actually changed all of our moods. It changed all of our mindsets. We reacted to that environment, and so that's changing a stressor. Stressors, though, I just want to say very flatly, are going to happen. There's no way we can say we're going to have a stress-free work environment. That is not something that is a reasonable goal, and it's not something that you would even be able to control or even necessarily want to control. Sometimes you're doing really important work and it's stressful. Think of an emergency room doctor. There is no emergency room situation that is unstressful, or else maybe they wouldn't be in the emergency room. So you can't always control it. But burnout, if we turn to like the next definition there, burnout can be the result of stressors. So stressors in the workplace can cause burnout, but burnout in itself is actually, it's what's called an occupational syndrome, or it can be an occupational condition too, depending on where you look. So if you look at the WHO handbook, they have like a kind of section on what burnout is. And it even has its own code, but that doesn't matter. The point is that it's often described as cynicism, emotional exhaustion, lack of motivation, and if feeling like the work you're doing just isn't, it's useless. It's not helping me. It's hurting me. It's a pain to do. It's a chore to do. And the thing is, it's a result of many stressors in your individual life and in the organization itself, in your organizational life, your work life. So think of it like this: stressors occur. There's many little stressors that might hit you, and based on the organization you work in, your own personal resilience, and the types of stressors they are, you can maybe kind of stand up to them and kind of put them in their place and continue to thrive. Or sometimes they can become too much. They can be overwhelming. And that's when things like burnout start to occur. And burnout, it goes in levels. I mean, there definitely is, kind of burnout that can dissipate a little bit depending on how strong the stressors you're facing are, or it can become, really overwhelming and overburdening. Usually, when it hits the point of an employee's experiencing burnout, they've usually exhausted a lot of their resources. So if you're seeing your employees burned out and you're starting to see, pretty clear signs that they're acting cynical, maybe they're losing their motivation, lack of empathy, you're starting to pick that up. They've probably exhausted what they could to try to stop that from happening. People don't set out in their work to do a terrible job or to burn out. Nobody's looking to burn out. And so that from that point, if you see an employee going through that, you might want to look at the organization, what's going on, and think of burnout as something to kind of identify, and then use that as a metric to work back and see how your employees are doing, if they're getting better or worse.
Mm-hmm. Are there concrete things that management or leaders can do when there is burnout? Because I mean, it's not only, it creates unhealthy work environments. It's also really costly because you might have a lot of turnover, or people come to work and they're just not getting along, and then that might lead to HR complaints. Or I mean, it can really create problems when you have people at work who normally would be effective but are not being effective, and that's a big. Not only is it a cost to humans and their mental health and their capacity to produce at the highest level, but also just costs organizations a lot of money. So what would be ways that organizations can tackle those things in terms of, you identify it, and then what are some things that can be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to be very clear, burnout, you're exactly right. Burnout is costly. Burnout, I mean, there's plenty of metrics we can look up really quickly. You can just Google the cost of burnout. It'll pop up. It is extremely costly. It's been shown. So it is something for us to care about as a bottom line, and human well-being, and for the people who you serve and the people you work with, your customers or clients, whatever it might be. But things you can do, I mean, this is really important. This is really a lot of where my research is burnout reduction interventions, or burnout prevention interventions. So they're usually, there are individual types of interventions. So things like learning mindfulness in the workplace, things like practicing self-care. They're really important. And I encourage everyone, I mean, anyone who listens to this should think, do I practice self-care? Can I? It's important, it's good. And I do encourage, I sometimes I think I talk a little too down on those things. They're really important and I value them. But I think that more focus needs to be put on what organizations can do and management can do to try to eliminate the environment that creates burnout. So that means changing the work environment. And that goes back to that whole changing the nature of work thing that was in my bio, which
right. And I'll get into a deeper dive of that later as well. So
definitely.
Good.
And
yeah. So on the question of sort of work culture, and I've sort of alluded to it. I mean, I bring to my coaching practice my expertise in conflict resolution in my work in that field, because I know that when there is conflict, it is a total killer of the things that make organizations and teams work well, right? Conflict kills creativity, right? Problem solving probably not going to happen if you're in a conflict mood, right? Collaboration, forget about it. And then innovation, which is what everybody wants, whether they're small, big, or by themselves, right? Everybody wants to innovate, right? I know that we talk about stressors and things that lead to burnout, that conflict is a big thing that could do all those things. So can you also just talk a little bit about the ways that burnout negatively impacts like working relationships and cultures,
Definitely. I
working
think,
cultures?
yeah, when we think about kind of what creates a toxic work culture or negative work culture, conflict is very often at the center of it. And I think any of us who've been in the workforce know that like it's when you're in a conflict with somebody, I mean, your guard is up, you're reactionary. You're not necessarily thinking, strategically for the organization or strategically even for yourself. Sometimes you're feeling insulted, so you lash out, and that person then responds, and you have a back and forth, and you're literally paralyzed at that point. So so it is it's I would say that conflict is the sort of thing that we have to have mechanisms in place first off to mediate conflict. I mean, you have to think about kind of people and policies in place that are already in organizations to readily kind of identify conflict and have a way to kind of mediate and reconcile it really quickly. Because if we think about it, I said this before, the workplace being safe and that element of safety means you're going to be able to thrive. If you're in conflict with someone, I don't think there's no real way you can feel safe. That safety's now been eliminated. It's been taken away. You're feeling threatened, and it's your livelihood. And also, I mean, I'm not going to get into all this, but it's also a big part of your identity. Who we are and our job titles like really factor into how we see ourselves. So that's being threatened. Your safety is gone. So if let's say that's the scenario, you're in a conflict, your safety is gone. How can you ask for help? How can you collaborate as a team? I mean, nobody thinks they can get their entire job done by themselves. We all exist. I mean, the workplace is a social place. It is, a conglomeration of people working together. It's that whole synergy idea. It's there. I would say even if you're a freelancer, even if you work for yourself and by yourself, you still have to interact with systems, customers. Maybe it's IT or tech support for something that you rent out. You still have to be able to ask questions, make mistakes, rebound, and improve. And if you're not able to do that, you don't have that safety, you can't do your job effectively, you're going to start to be in a situation where you're helpless, where you cannot continue to improve or even function or even do your job well. Now we're dealing with stressors. Now we're dealing with potential burnout.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I think what's interesting, what's striking to me is that people burn at different levels, right? So these stressors add up. One, as somebody might have a bad week and then they're getting closer to the burnout than somebody. It's like, I think you described it earlier, sort of a spectrum, right? And it's an ongoing, and it doesn't just stop because there's been some kind of intervention or moment with the boss, right? What are ways that as a manager, if you have people that are in completely different sort of headspaces in burnout, but are working towards the same objectives, what are some ways to sort of address the fact that some people are just at different like levels of their burning out?
Yeah, it's a really important question because we're all individuals in the workplace. We come in with our own experiences. We come in with our own battles that we fought. We've come in facing different obstacles and oppression. I mean, the fact is, and this comes a lot from social work, is that if we have to look at issues like race in the workplace, gender in the workplace, age, seniority, education, training, class. These things matter. Country of origin, language skills. These all affect access to resources in an organization and access to coping skills, access to your ability to use an employee assistance program where you get some paid for therapy by your organization. That's a very common thing you see in large organizations where the organization will pay for some therapy sessions through the employee assistance program. And if you're really in the know, let's say you're a clinical social worker and you're taking work at a hospital, you might know everything about that employee assistance program and you can get there. But let's say that you don't have that background. Let's say you're new to this entire field, new to this entire country, new to English. You might not be able to access that so easily. So we're definitely going to deal with employees at different levels of burnout. And so when you're a leader, this is where that first step of evaluation comes in. Understanding who your employees are. I mean, I think it's cliche to say get to know your employees. If you have a huge organization, maybe you can't personally get to know your employees, but you have to create systems where you're understanding where your employees are coming from. And more importantly, you have to set a culture at the top where you're willing to meet people where they are. This is a term we often talk about in social work with clients. It's not used enough in organizations. So I'd really urge any leaders out there, meet your employees where they are. If they're, if they're, let's say they're a single parent, that's going to factor into their workload. They might be more burned out than somebody who's not a single parent. So for example, I don't have kids. Let's say it was me in the same position as somebody who's a single parent. They might have more stress than I do. And so then they might be more kind of prone to burnout. They might burn out quicker or have more severe burnout than me because I might have more resources and time to work on myself or work on self-care or whatever it might be. So employers need to know where their employees are, meet them where they are. And then I would also say setting that culture at the top. So allowing channels of communication to speak up and feeling safe when you're having issues. So employees are going to know when they're going to have issues. We are not psychic. We are not going to know that single parent's single parent until we know. If they don't want to tell you, you're not going to know. And that's their prerogative. I mean, there's privacy in the workplace for a reason. Your employer doesn't need to know everything about your life. But if you have a safe and open environment, if you can create an environment of safety and openness, learning, thriving, they will come to you and say, look, this is the issue right now. This is what's going on with me. What are some things we can work out? And then you can take an individual approach. Now, let's say it's a group of employees, like let's say you're having a nursing department and a social work department. I deal a lot with healthcare agencies. So
yeah, I can tell.
then from there, what you might want to do is you might want to go into your hierarchies. You might want to like tap into managers and leadership at a lower level. So there's levels of management in your organization. You might want to talk to them about doing separate approaches based on the department they're in. That's a more intricate, kind of like complicated, intricate answer. But I think if everyone listening to this were to just say, okay, I'm going to meet my employees where they are, and I'm going to create that culture of openness, learning, and being able to ask for help when needed, you're going most of the way.
Perfect, right, and that's a lot. And so again, that's kind of the work that is at the heart of what I do in terms of the team building work and the team exercises, is making sure that people are doing that and know what kinds of questions to ask and are coached in knowing how to respond and to work through some of those not those structural issues as well, and not just having the hard conversations, but creating safe and equitable spaces, because that's where the learning happens, right? No one feels safe or like they can learn in a space that doesn't provide that level of equity.
Absolutely.
In my view.
Oh, you're completely right. Yeah.
So what strikes me is in this conversation that we're having is we're in about year 2 of COVID, and I'm sure that it is not lost on you the impact that is probably having on workplaces, but also on this issue of burnout. And I'm assuming you're probably seeing more of that, or at least a different type or different rate than previously, or at least you've observed that. So given the way that COVID has impacted people, and again, it impacts people at different levels, and that's sort of the tie into the last comment and question we made, right? So given the impact that COVID has had on our society, and it's impacted people financially and mentally and obviously through their health and things like that, what advice would you give to leaders on things that they can do to empower employees to rise to the occasion in the face of such uncertainty?
Yeah. So it is something that I've really, since the beginning of the pandemic, it is something we have all in the kind of in my research world, and whether it's social work or organizational well-being, employee well-being, organizational psychology, everyone's pivoted to it of what's the effect of COVID, how is this, how it's going to happen. And I was luckily recently part of a book that came out on social work experiences during COVID, and kind of what they, how they're thriving or maybe not thriving during the COVID-19 pandemic, and kind of what they might need. So I think what I'd say to employers is right off the bat, environments have changed during COVID. So a lot of places where we usually would say, do this or this to mitigate your stress, that doesn't work even more now. So this is where I'm going to kind of attack self-care a little bit more. So self-care is contingent upon having a safe place outside of work. That doesn't exist anymore. The fact is, if someone says, go take an extra 30 minutes for your lunch, or take a day off and go do something fun, those might not be available. Those might not be safe. The home might not be safe. The truth is that could be the case anyway. And I think employees, even after the pandemic, need to realize everyone's in different circumstances. So that could happen anyway. But in COVID, we know it's happening. So this is kind of a sad remark, but burnout has been rampant well before the COVID-19 pandemic. It is usually the measurements of it are so high, it almost becomes kind of whitewashed. We just say, we know this is an absolute, like, it's almost its own kind of pandemic, where it's rampant, it's everywhere, and it has serious effects. During COVID, we now have less resources to deal with burnout, plus we have some circumstances where workload is increased. So there's models to predict burnout. that people can look up and just Google models to predict burnout. And you can see one of the biggest factors is increasing workload, losing control of your work and your work resources. So that's happening right now too. So if employers can see that coming and say, okay, my organization's having an increased workload, or my employees have a lot less control over how they can get their job done, you should be alert that the kind of potential for burnout is higher. But there's another really big factor that we need to classify of what COVID-19 is in the workplace. It's called a shared trauma. So it's something we've all gone through together. And it's something that doesn't get a lot of attention, I think, in a lot of management spaces. It does in clinical spaces. So for folks who are watching, might be clinicians, they might be rolling their eyes saying, we knew that. But if you haven't heard of it, it's an important thing to quickly go over. When we experience a trauma or a tragedy of some kind that we experience and our employees experience and our customers experience, now we're mixing a lot of different environments with a common stressor. You have to go home and hope your kids aren't sick. You have to hope your grandparents aren't sick. You have to hope you yourself don't get sick, and maintain professionality and maintain your identity and politeness and customer service. All those things still have to happen. And your customers and employees are under more stress. So you're going to see that coming from all sorts of different directions. We need to acknowledge that that's happening. And we need to understand that when traumas occur, we need stabilization. So a really important thing for employers to do is to have more meetings where you're doing some kind of check-in, increase that contact. I don't mean micromanage. I don't mean sit there and hang over people at work and make sure they're actually doing something and not taking a nap. Do the opposite. Encourage them to maybe take a nap if they're feeling really stressed out. We can all feel trapped. I mean, I'm in my apartment right now, so sometimes we can't leave. So if this wasn't the pandemic, you and I would probably be at your place or my place, and we'd be together. It's not the same. So I think employers need to recognize that we're all going through this, and that to increase that communication, open up new lines of communication, but also lead through example. So one thing that I'm really big on is structure in the workplace. I think that if leaders model having boundaries between work and life, and they model taking care of yourself, and they encourage it and don't kind of go the opposite direction and make it seem like a sign of weakness, right, you're changing culture, but you're also you could be saving a life. I mean, you could be saving an employee's well-being and sanity and life. So the fact is, let's say during COVID, everyone's on Zoom, you could work till 9 p.m. because it's your company, you're in charge, but the workplace closes at 5, close at 5, especially now during COVID. Make sure employees know it's okay to take that time to unwind in any way they can, because they have less options. Remember, they have less ways to unwind. So if they have a way, let them do it. If they need more space and time, let that happen as well. I know we have to remain competitive. We have to remain profitable. That's always going to be the case in any kind of business scenario. But during this time, employees are definitely giving everything they can. You're not going to squeeze, what is it? You can't squeeze water out of a rock. I don't know what the phrase is. You're not going to squeeze water out of them. Is that right?
It is now.
It is now, sorry. But what I'm trying to say is you're not going to get more out of them. People are already stressed enough. So we need to have more communication, model structure, give opportunities to have people really express their needs and take care of themselves.
Okay, I have 2 follow-ups to the shared trauma question.
Of course.
Or comment. One is do you have any hope, or is any thoughts on when people collectively, trauma is an intimate thing, right? When people collectively experience something, does that mean that can be something that brings them together in a way that they may not have been brought together beforehand? Do you think that when people get back from COVID, it's going to build more resiliency and community because they've been through this thing together?
It's such an important point. And I love that you're thinking that way, because I think workplaces need to think this way too. Yes, the really short answer, yes. It's called post-traumatic growth. So when we go through a trauma and we're able to get through it, and it doesn't stunt us, it doesn't hold us back, we don't develop trauma reactions. Like we often hear about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Sure. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here. I'm just saying that that's an example of being stunted by trauma, where it really holds up your life, it holds you back. But if you're able to use your resources, learn new resources, feel supported, feel community, yeah, you have that growth, that post-traumatic growth, and then you can be even stronger. And the people who you went through that with, there is certainly a feeling of You've gotten through something together. You've relied on each other. You've developed new pathways to communicate, new pathways to resolve conflict. The fact is, let's say you're a nurse in an ER right now. Everyone's on top of each other. Everyone's overworked. You may need to develop new ways to say, look, I need space, and not say that point blank. That might offend somebody, who knows? So you have to develop these new systems and structures to do that. That will maintain that those new structures will bring strength, but also there's something we can't touch, something we can't quantify, going through something together and getting through that trauma together. But as a quick little side note, I do want to, and when you were asking the question, I do want to point this out.
Sure.
Yes, everyone also does experience traumas differently.
Yeah.
I would urge leaders not to assume a trauma reaction is going to occur. It's different for everybody. The way people express trauma can be very, very different, and the way it manifests is very, very different. If you develop an open culture and strong lines of communication with your employees, you'll know what's going on with them. They'll come to you. You can't be psychic, and you can't do a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right, and that's where the challenge of sort of institutionalizing any response to stress, burnout, or trauma is that people, like you said, have a different response to it. And so that makes it hard. That could also potentially sort of the other flip side of the coin, of the optimistic version in terms of post-traumatic growth, is that if people are responding with divergent ways, or their experience was just different, that could also perhaps be a new thing that creates structural differences within an organization, right? And I'm thinking back to we've also had a lot of racial trauma. I mean, I wouldn't say recently. It's just been under a microscope in the last year or so. If you're the only two people of color in the office, you might bond with that other person because you have that shared trauma. But potentially that could also create then like you two become the only people in that office that have that shared experience, and it just means that there's different levels of experience within the office place, and potential for that to create organizational challenges. I don't know if you have any thoughts on how people on that comment, but
well, I think it's an important thing to think about, because it hasn't just been COVID. I mean, there's been a lot that's 2020 was a year. I mean, it was 20 years. So like it was a lot for all of us to deal with. And the fact is, some organizations have responded with superficial things, like just kind of putting out little statements that don't mean anything and haven't changed internally. But there are some organizations that have looked internally and tried to say, okay, how can we be part of the difference here? And it becomes a difficult conversation to have internally, because again, not every workplace has a bunch of therapists on staff. So it's hard to facilitate those things. They might need to hire a coach. Just saying, it might need to happen where they say, okay, I need someone to facilitate this because this is going to be really raw. But a commitment to having those conversations will make that, provide opportunity to really grow as an organization and bond over those things. When it comes to race, we have to be more educated, and we have to be more careful. We have to know what we're doing even more if we're not a person of color. I think that, like for example, myself, like I'm a white male, like I need to be aware of those systems in place and how they benefit me for absolutely no reason, and be able to come to the table knowing that. So that's a challenge for a lot of workplaces. Where not every employee has that perspective, and you can't, you can't always like put that on an employee. So instead, that's when you turn to policy. That's when you turn to structure. That's when I don't think the answer to burnout is individual solutions. I don't think everyone gets their own little personalized remedy. That it can't happen every single time. There is a place for policy, and there is a place for culture, and those things affect everybody who are within them. I think that when it comes to COVID-19 related stressors, we're all dealing with COVID. We're all dealing with it in different ways. So you need to allow the opportunity for individualized care and individualized support when needed, not as the first line. I think I didn't make that clear before, but I hope that's clear now.
Got it. Thank you. And yeah, that brings us to the question of fundamentally changing the nature of work that you had brought up, and I told you to save that because we'd get to it. So one of the things that I mentioned in terms of my work with clients is helping them create a purpose statement, right? If it's an organization, that might mean a mission statement or a vision statement, but also individuals often have their own purpose statement. It gives them a goal. It gives them not just a goal, but something that they can like long-term achieve, right? And so, and the difference between sort of a purpose and a goal, in my view, is that if you have a purpose, your life experience might not always be going in the straight way, right? So if your purpose is service and you think the only way for me to serve is to do this one thing, and then something happens and you can't do that anymore, but you know service is your purpose, then that gives you some more agility because you can find those things, right? When you talked earlier about your passion, a lot about what you're talking about was like sort of purpose driven stuff, right? Because it's things can move, but you still have sort of that North Star, and that North Star is purpose, and it leads to that perseverance and the resilience, because it's, oh my God, I got knocked off of this, but I can come back because I'm still thinking about this purpose, right? And so my purpose statement is to empower others to lead successful, meaningful, and purposeful careers and lives, right? And so coaching is a mechanism for that, right? In previous work, I was a Peace Corps volunteer that was a mechanism for helping people live purposeful lives and empower successful lives, right? I also do mediation, right? There are a lot of things that can go into the purpose, right? And so the part of your bio that I flagged sort of as your purpose statement is to finally address burnout and change the nature of work. So can you walk me and your viewers through sort of your process for coming up with that as your purpose? And also, can you tell me what you mean by change the nature of work?
Absolutely, yeah. And I put it that way on purpose, hoping there's an explanation. So basically, what I've seen when I've kind of the motivation for my career has been workplace stress. It's been who's taking care of the workers, what happens when they are in these environments that are really difficult and they're doing things they care about, but they're not supported, or their environment is toxic, or the work is not being supported in some way materially. So what I learned really quickly is you can't change the work. The work we do, it speaks to what you're saying before, the work we do is the work we do. It is by nature sometimes going to be difficult. Let's say you choose to be a therapist. You're going to have clients with really difficult circumstances that are coming to you. You cannot control that. That is part of the nature of your work. That is the work. It's what you do. What you can do is you can change the workplace. You can change what work actually means in today's context. So right now, I'd argue we glorify burnout. We glorify working until you're completely, at your wit's end, and you work 30 hours straight and haven't stopped. And, that's glorified right now. We need to change what the workplace is in our society. We need to recognize that it is a place we develop. It is a place where we grow. It is a place where we need to feel safe. We need to feel secure, and we need to be able to thrive in it. It's that important. So that's what changing the nature of work really means to me. Is it means not changing the actual work, not changing, if you're an emergency room doctor, you're in an emergency room. It is going to be emergencies, I swear. I would never want to change that. I think we need emergency rooms, but what we can do is we can change the resources in the emergency room, the workflow structures, the decision-making processes, the accountability procedures, the improvement procedures, the technology even. There's a lot of great literature coming out about the role of technology. A lot of doctors get a lot of burnout through administrative work, writing notes and bills, billing insurance, and all those sorts of things. But technology can really help make that more smooth. That is part of changing the workplace. That's changing what the work actually looks like, changing the nature of work. So not changing the work, but changing the nature of work. I know it's confusing, but that's kind of my thought on it.
No, that's awesome. I love it. Awesome. And I'm trying to, I have like so many things in my brain right now. I'm trying to figure out like the next, how to, like what the follow up there, because you've said so many rich things about the, I guess what strikes me is that you sort of alluded to, like that's very counter culture in an American context. We're competitive. We, like you said, we pride ourselves on working really hard. But and sometimes you have to go slow to go fast, right? Sometimes if you want to be successful, there are a million startups that last, not very long, because they try to, do everything all the time, and it doesn't, it's hard. So it's just, I guess I don't really have a question. I guess I just had a thought that like, it seems like that is, well, that seems like the ambition to change the nature of work. I'm thinking about how that works for like one organization, but how that plays out like as a domino effect to change other organizations. And I guess the answer is that if it works for one organization and you find out that actually addressing issues of burnout makes you more competitive, then other organizations will follow, because that's why they're being so work driven in the first place.
Yeah, and it is counterculture, and it's counter American culture in some ways, because it points to a very progressive idea that that communities and communal action can actually maybe be more than individualized action. So it can actually do better, and it's something that is not, I would say, rewarded in America right now. Right now, we are a very individual
Right.
focused country, and a lot of our values are on the individual, but we do need each other, and we do need to work together to get things done, and we always have. We just haven't always acknowledged it.
Mhm.
So the fact is that when you say that domino effect, it's exactly right, because if, let's say, an organization learns to create an organization where their workers thrive, where they're cared for, where they're safe, where they're secure, where they have the resources and the control and all those things as channels to do their job, that's going to create a company or organization of any kind that is doing better. You will have that competitive advantage, because now you have 10 thriving employees working on something, where in another organization that's not doing any of those things, you have a lot of employees already burned out, 2 are already heading for the door for turnover, 1 is about to be burned out, and then there's 1 person sitting in their office with their head on their hands thinking, what am I going to do? So the individual there can't solve all the problems.
Sure.
So that organization will become more competitive. And this is what I always try to tell people, that it's a counterculture idea. It'll still work for your bottom line. I've had a lot of people say, well, business is business. You've got to make your profit. These things exist for a reason. Be that as it may, we can argue that all the time. But the fact is, even if you believe that and you work together, you will have a competitive advantage, and that will lead to industry change. So when I say change the nature of work, I really don't mean just one organization. I mean,
Right.
in my dreams, it's just a dream, but in my dreams, it goes to changing industries and economies. I mean, it can have just a cascading effect upward to changing the economy, because if it became a norm, let's say, that organizations take, have resources, plans, and policies in place to mitigate stressors for employees. They have plans for if somebody's burned out. They have resources to support, outside of work needs, full parental leave, but much, much more than that. That's just an example. They're going to create stronger organizations. They're going to create that competitive advantage. It's going to become a norm for maybe now that their competitor organization who wants to take all their talent, or who knows, get the new people. It should have a cascading effect. And I don't want people to be lost on the idea that it's just investing money in nothing. This is investing very heavily in the success of the organization. It's investing in the bottom line, and it's using a very progressive idea and theory.
Yeah, thank you. And I love it how that connects right back to Sound Your Coaching Solutions, where again our motto is empowering success and empowering people, because you can't have either or, right, or one without the other. And yeah, so when you talk about sort of this idea of community as being one of the things that really helps deal with uncertainty, and we talked a little bit about post-traumatic growth, I want to talk a little bit about 2020, and I would hope that maybe this question of changing work, in some ways, maybe 2020 would be the impetus, because we are realizing that we're stuck at home and working individually is hard, and we sort of have a desire to be more social and work together. Maybe that would be something that would kind of be a wake-up call, is, oh, we need to start working together and taking care of each other and being compassionate with the people that we work with. Because what you just described, all of those things, right? The policies, right? They're compassionate policies, and they're not just really good for the workers. Like, you undertake them because, like, even in a more sort of cynical way, it's really good for the company to do those things, right? So that's all to say, what was one thing that you, Julian, learned in 2020 that'll help you in 2021 that you think other people would benefit from knowing about?
I mean, there's a lot of things that come to mind. I think, to keep it simple, though, and I think simple is really important, it's to understand dynamics. It's to understand the power of culture. So the example we set, and the way we approach an issue, like just the process of it, might actually be more important than what you achieve. As strange as that sounds, it's to think about and to really value, even more than the outcome, the process of change. and to kind of let go a little bit of where it's going to lead, and instead understand that by taking a journey, by saying like, we're going to improve the workplace, we're going to add these resources, you have to see then how they're utilized. You have to see then what effect it has. It plays into this a type of science called implementation science. So implementation science, it's kind of it's this idea of how do you, let's say you have a great intervention, you have a really good training program on how to identify burnout, well before it happens, and managers and leaders can take it and they can just become experts at identifying it. It works, it's there, and you have an organization, you have a small hospital. You still have to get that intervention into that hospital in a way that it works. That means understanding fit. It means understanding process. It means understanding what your staff already think. Are they already tired of interventions? Have they already had one a week? Have they never had one? Understanding the makeup of your organization. Have they all kind of been told that they're not doing a good job? Do they all have certain key issues? That's implementation. That's the process. It's not valued enough, but it is, to me, like in 2020, it just became so clear how important those things were, and how we can be results oriented, and that's a really great catchphrase. It really might not be where we actually should be looking.
No, I agree. I talk about that all the time, like process goals versus outcome goals. And like, if you don't have a process, good luck with the outcomes. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right, thanks. Is there anything I didn't ask you about, or anything we didn't cover that you would like to bring up as it relates to sort of your experience and your work that you think could help my viewers think about any all of these topics about organizational challenges and health?
That's a good question. Let me quickly think. I think, one thing comes to mind, just for because just for folks who might be doing this, they might be leaders in organizations. Try to normalize burnout, and try to understand that like these things can happen, and just kind of like, I think acknowledgement of struggling is really okay.
Yeah.
It kind of touches on themes you've talked about, but I didn't say it point blank, and I just think it's really important. Just sometimes owning that things are hard, and that they truly are hard, and that there's might not be something you can do to make them not difficult, but you can work together, you can find other ways to empower yourself. And I think that's what empowerment really means. It doesn't mean like having no issues in life. They're going to happen. Stresses are going to happen. The seeds of burnout will be there. They'll always be in the ground. The question is whether you can find ways to not let them fester and really harm you, and harm your well-being in your life.
Awesome. Thanks so much.